Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We are Jeff and Tara Matson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Tara is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace.
Welcome back to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We're so grateful you're partnering with us in the journey to shrink our integrity gaps and to become wholehearted leaders. We have Monty and Stephanie Schmidt back with us today. Gosh, they had us on the edge of the seat at the beginning of their story, and now we're going to hear more of the hope and the renewal that takes place in their relationship, which is awesome. We know a bit about that, so get ready. Monty is one of our professional counselors who served in full-time pastoral ministries, and prior to that was a business leader and a teacher. Together with his wife, Stephanie, they have 5 children, 2 adopted, and are telling more of their lives as leaders.
We're in the middle of processing a really hard season of leadership. So you can listen to the beginning of that journey in our first episode. You can definitely hear more of what led up to this healing journey, but we're going to dive in where we left off. We want to know, as you entered counseling and your doctors and your team of godly people, you said, started to come around you as you were facing a real burnout and what you said was clinical depression. The adrenals were really shutting down. Talk to us more about what it really looked like as you stepped into your healing journey.
Well, as we briefly mentioned the earlier session, is that in this journey that we were on, really, it was I had to be taken out. Those trust structures had to be demolished first, and so then it moves us into this place now that really the reality of what life was like prior now is gone. There's lots of unknowns. And so as Steph said last time, she was like, okay, good. She's starting to breathe a sigh of relief, like, good, I don't know what it is, but we're going to get help. I was not there. Now I found myself, and see, these are a couple of the key ingredients, I think, for me, and I think some of them hopefully generally translate to good healing, is, first of all, I had to come out. I had to face reality. I was in a false reality. Right. So I now for the first time really in my life, and the most significant, down to the deepest root systems, I was now having to face reality that for my whole life had scared me to death. And that's significant because I know just as a human being how hard that is. Right. Now we're going to, Steph and I are going to talk about it through our circumstances, but just the humanity comes in here. So what that meant then is for months, I was now under the care of people who knew what they were doing. Where before, just the month before that would have scared me to death. I don't want to get near those people because they're actually I knew what would happen intuitively deep down, but until that time, it was like, no, I'm going to do this. Because my control issues, I can call them whatever you want to call them, but man, I had learned how to control down to the nth degree. Now that was gone. So now I'm allowing trained professionals, both medical and psychological people, to come in and start to do their work. But by this time I was in rough shape, really rough shape, because now I'm contending with the reality of hiding and coping for so long. It's like, the quick example of you would never ask somebody with pneumonia to keep out going for good runs, right? But yet I knew that I was in deep shape, but I still was having a hard time shutting it off. In fact, our church, friends, family put protective mechanisms in so that I actually couldn't, because they were a little concerned I'd keep going back to those coping mechanisms. During that time, though, I think that a couple things then that were really important is I had to give myself permission to heal, something I had not done before, and that took some time. Second was just this deep integration work. It was bringing me into reality. It was facing my wounds in a way that I could do that in a safe place where I could be mad. I was really mad and angry at God, at myself, at being adopted, parents. I had to go through that, but I had to do it in a way that I had to really let it out. There was a cathartic process. And at the time, I just thought I was just being mad. But I was also lovingly being confronted, right? And I'd mentioned before, I could never take a compliment. And my counselor very lovingly called me on that. She said, well, what's that like? And I said, well, I just think people are being nice. They don't really mean it. They're being nice. And she said, okay, what else? And I said, well, I just don't think they don't have very high expectations. And so she just lovingly said, so you have amazingly been able to surround yourself by a bunch of low-achieving liars then.
I knew it was coming. Something was coming.
It was awesome.
But and it made me really angry. See, that really made me angry that she would say that. But at the same time, now, because I can't go back, I'm having to face this stuff. And when I say I can't go back, I suppose I could. In fact, my counselor told me one time, she said, oh, you have lots of options. People just disappear. Whether it's a bottle or a needle, or they just literally disappear. She said, oh, you got lots of choices. But it felt like to me, I did need to be at this place right where God wanted me to be, so that all of the false self kind of stuff, all those trust structures, I couldn't go back to them anymore. And I felt naked and exposed. But ultimately, as you guys know as well or better than I do, is that is the byproduct of that toxic shame. I'm not good enough. And so that just kept coming and coming. And through the process, one of the most profound things that I will say that I had to really face was the fact that my counselor would look at me and she'd say, Monty, everything you're feeling is real. This is real. It's just not true. It's not the deeper truth of who you are. But until you face that reality has such power over you, it is quite literally augmenting your reality. And so that healing journey was months and months and months of doing that. But the other components that I would say that were crucial to me, and I think these one could make a case they're generally true, but I would say for me is that I had love and support now for people who really knew me. I knew they knew me. They knew the part that I was trying to hide, and they didn't leave. Now, they weren't trying to fix me, but they weren't leaving. They were supporting. It's like, okay, come on, just, do your work kind of thing. Second, I now had people embedded in my life that I had never let in before that had the experience, the capability, the wisdom, the empathy to actually traverse those deep places that I had no idea how to get there, because it was like that was a vault. Nobody goes there. And they could say, let's go there together. And then the final thing that was really important, I think, overall in the journey was realizing that this wasn't something to check a box, back to the marathon analogy. It was like, this is a stage of life that has the potential to help me now see what the rest of my life could look like. So that's where the hope came in. It doesn't have to be that way. And in fact, as I came through my healing journey, I knew that I had to resign. I knew that what I had been doing was not right. And that I just couldn't go on, where before that would have absolutely terrified me. But now it began to be liberating. It's like, no, I said yes to a lot of things, not because it was bad or I didn't believe it. It just, I didn't know if it was for me because I didn't know me. And now I could go on and discover some of those things that I felt like were really a part of me at the deeper levels, which, as you guys know and Steph knows, it really hasn't been that different. I mean, I was able to redeem a lot of that, but at a much deeper, truer level, because now I feel like I was coming into a sense of reality.
I want to ask a question about just when you think about your guys' relationships with God and where you were both at it, because it's not uncommon for people, especially spouses, to be in different places at different days and different times of the day, especially when you're going through something so life-changing as this story is that you guys have been sharing. So, Monty, for example, when you indicated that you could, We like to say that the counseling office is the privacy of that, where Christians can be heretics for a bit,
Yeah.
like you gotta get some stuff out here. And God, in his loving providence, he has broad shoulders and he can handle these things. He loves us and knows he's helping the poison. I think this is the metaphor I use to come out, because he knows that that's what's going to heal, and he knows how to do it. So I guess the poignant question is that when did you know that what you were feeling about God went from here to actually here, and he was changing you? And what did that do for you in your relationship with him?
And when you said here to here, you pointed to your head.
Oh, right. The audience can't see.
I know.
Yeah. Thank you, Tara.
Yeah, but it went from your head to your heart to your gut.
It's my helpmate right there,
Yeah.
people. Shining.
Yeah. That's a great question. Yeah. And several people over the years have asked me that. Because, again, I think this can be generally true, but here I was, I had been serving as a pastor. I'm preaching the gospel, right? I'm believing, but yet and I would say that's back to, I actually, when I drew this picture, and actually somebody had a dream about this exact picture, where the way that I described myself before I went through this process is that I was in a house. I was this little boy in a house. And the house was on fire. I mean, there was like fire all around the house. Outside of that house, and that fire represented everything that I dreamed of. Being the person, the follower of Jesus, the husband, the dad, the friend, the minister. But then there was the fire that represented, there's a whole layer there that is so scary. And then in the house was this scared little boy. And this house was on a foundation that was just blank. I didn't know what that foundation was. So I think the moment that in this, and it wasn't just one like lightning bolt thought, but I do really believe, Jeff, the process was I had to face the facts that I was in that house. There were things that I wasn't letting in because I could just see myself as that scared little boy. That's what took up the most residence in my heart, were those things that just, I didn't understand them. They scared me. So the reality of the gospel, I haven't said, well, I don't think I really believed in God, or I believed in a false version of God. I don't think that was part of my story. But as long as that was taking up residence, the depth of the gospel could not get in. It was trying. I mean, I can look back over all those years, see the people, all of that stuff, but I waved them off, right? But ultimately, through, again, coming to the end of myself, so to speak, in terms of health, ability, those trust structures, as they came down, it was just like those streams of living water coming into places experientially that I would preach on, I would teach on, I would discipleship out of. I knew all the concepts. And again, and just the way that God has made me, I could communicate it. I could make it sound so good. Deep down, I wanted it so bad, but I couldn't get there until those structures went down.
There's so much you're saying. And one of the profound pieces we talk about often is that most leaders at some point, and a lot of ministry leaders, are really good at letting everyone know how much they're loved, but haven't experienced and haven't received that love to themselves. And so you're speaking so poignantly to that. Stephanie, often we can see what others can't see up close and personal, right? Like Monty's experiencing this on the inside, and here you are living with him for many years. You guys have been married how many years by the time this is happening?
A lot.
A lot. So talk about what you were seeing, and what I think in the last episode he said he was afraid you were going to leave if you knew this part of him. Mm-hmm. Why'd you stay? Talk about that.
Well, I didn't know that leaving was even in his thought. I mean, I didn't even know that's what was going on. And I guess one of the words that I would use that I felt like I went through during this time was I went through a real learning season, and I was learning a lot about depression. I was learning a lot about adrenal burnout. We had just been through a long season of learning about attachment. We went through 4 years with a really gifted attachment therapist for our 2 adopted girls. And this was just on the heels of that. So we were really in this learning phase already. And a lot of that played into what was going on. But it seemed like this was my next chapter of learning. And I was learning about Monty. and learning about things that were going on inside his head that I wasn't aware of at all, and I was surprised to learn. And so even when I found out that those were things that were going through his mind, that was surprising and confusing because I had no clue. One of the things that I discovered is, well, to back up, I just have always found Monty to be so incredibly capable and strong. He has such gifts with people, leading people. I didn't realize, though, that one of the things that was fueling that is just Monty's deep desire inside to prove his own worth to himself. We hear a lot about people who kind of go on this life journey of trying to prove their worth to other members of their families or parents, but for Monty, it was trying to prove his own worth to Monty. And I didn't know that that was going on, and that was really something that was fueling a lot of his desire or his decisions to say yes to a lot of things that he really should have been saying no to, because there just wasn't enough of him to keep going.
And this was happening simultaneously with the way you saw Monty, seeing his worth. Just express that a little bit. I mean, and that discovery and learning process for you.
Well, I didn't always handle it well, Jeff. And
Thank you for that honesty.
oh, the things I wish I could take back. You know, now knowing what he was going through, there was an opportunity that came up one time, and Monty was really hesitant to go forward with this opportunity. And all I could see was my incredibly strong, gifted husband. And I said, well, if you say no, it's just a total waste of the gifts that you've been given. What a horrible thing to say, but that's what I said.
You're not the first person that said something that they regret in that way. Okay, keeping it real.
So,
appreciate it,
yeah.
Stephanie.
But, you know, of course, that was really awful for him to hear. That did not feel good at all. And I have apologized profusely over the years. That was just not a good thing to say. But I just really didn't understand what was going on inside.
Yeah, I think that's just the honest reality of relationships. We don't always understand what's going on in ourselves, let alone in the one we love. So I think the posture you're both, kind of calling us to is to slow down and try to understand and not, assume even after 20 plus years of marriage or how many years of being a pastor that all of this must be smooth sailing, and the integration of what's happening on the inside doesn't always match what's happening on the outside. So
absolutely,
this journey is such a beautiful journey. If there's anything else you want to say about those necessary steps to your healing journey, otherwise take us towards how you're staying healthy today as you've moved through that.
Well, just one other thing that I would add that I felt like was one of the most important ingredients to Monty's healing, and I am so thankful that he was in a position to believe people outside of his own head, because he had really wonderful, wise people, his counselor, his doctor, but also was surrounded by wonderful men, wise, godly men who were speaking into him. And I remember a couple times having conversations with him, and he would tell something that one of them had said, and he would say to me, that makes absolutely no sense to me. It's just where he was emotionally, mentally at the time. He said, that makes absolutely no sense to me. But he said, it also doesn't make sense to me that all of you would be saying that same thing. So that can't be right, that I'm the only one that's right and you guys are all wrong. So I'm going to go with that. But that doesn't feel right on the inside. And I've always thought one of the keys to Monty's healing was him being able to say, I might be wrong on this, even though it feels so right.
Yeah, which I would just say, yes, that then leads back to what I talked about before, is that, again, what you call it, the false self, the trust structures, the power that I gave over this stuff. And some of it I knew and some of it I didn't know. It's that mix of sort of like, what part is me and that and all of that, and I just didn't know. But as it relates to another part of that healing, I had to get much more comfortable, I guess, for lack of a better word, with my wound. Because I was trying to overcome it. All my energies were trying to overcome the wound, like this stuff in me. And so what Steph is talking about was that place where I have to face the facts. I have to face reality. That opened the door for God's voice and other voices to come in that before I would have used those healed leadership coping mechanisms to just kind of say, yeah, you're right, and let's move on, or rationalize it, or whatever it was, because I knew how to navigate that so well. But again, that was just technical.
Mm-hmm.
Where what Steph is talking about was actually part of that ongoing letting voices in that I hadn't let in before.
And submission is a beautiful word in this case. Submitting ourselves to others that are proven or demonstrated a trustworthiness.
Yeah,
and I'm sure you kept circles small, and then learning actually how to believe, even that prayer of that we read about in the scriptures, that Lord, I believe, but help me in my unbelief. It's like I know about you, but I need you here, like in this way, the things that I've lent to others, and having been in pastoral ministry too, we lend a lot of that hope, and we do it professionally, but coming from a place where it's so personal. Oh, watch out. That's where it's like, that's so fun to see your journey in this process, because it's like, watch out. You get this pastor's heart, and you get this, and God's done this beautiful recovery work. Now the hunger for clinical equipping, and that watch out, because others that are going to be, you have eyes to see it, and you have competencies to help them.
So tell us about that journey of moving from pastoral. So you start out in teaching and then business vice president, then you move into pastoral ministry. You have the season of burnout and clinical depression, and you move through that as a family. And now you are a counselor. So tell us about that. How did that happen?
Well, I think that, I've told many people this, is that, people have kind of like, wow, you left ministry and went back to grad school, finished that out, and it's like in your 50s, like, and my short answer is I wasn't able to do that before. I wasn't prepared. Again, back to what I've said, it's like that would not have happened. I think the more poignant answer to what you're asking, though, Tara, is that back to the marathon analogy, which is there were so many things. I have a tendency, I love word pictures and metaphors, so I tend to look at our lives as a jigsaw puzzle. And the older we get, it is a puzzle. It's like we want everything to be filled in, but it takes time and experience, and it takes falling down and getting up. And so what's finally brought me, I think, to this part of my life was after I healed, like I told you before, I went back and said, hey, guys, thank you. You've loved me so well, to our elders and our leadership at our home church. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm so sorry, but I know now who I am and I can't do this. And they lovingly looked at me and said, well, what can you do? Which kind of like, oh, well, gosh, now that you say it. And so my last several years, one of the main things I did is I just shared my story. As we all know, in faith communities, depression, there's certain things that would fall into the category of mental illness that can be a little sticky, like, and won't go into all that, but that was my story now. And so really trying to bring a new level of authentic life on life, share my story, use that through ministry, but also through that found that my greatest satisfaction was sitting with another brother or sister in Christ, a couple, a family. And I just found myself in all those situations. And then God was bringing people to me. And so ultimately, after a lot of prayer and this whole time, in fact, Tara, you will remember this. This was like, gosh, shortly after that, I came to you and I said, Tara, let me just kind of throw an idea out there. I mean, someday I maybe could see following in your footsteps. And of course, Tara takes a long time to process. And so she just looked at me and said, do it. And that really, so I would feel that most of that time since it had been preparing me for the season that we're in now, and I've got miles and miles to go, but I think that, in this chapter of life, I feel most comfortable in my own skin. I think it's because I don't feel like I have all the answers at all. Years ago, I heard a wise saying which said, you should always have somebody in your life who's on their way back from where you're headed. And I feel like I've been down. I'm at mile 17 or 18 now, whatever it is. And I just feel a peace and a calling to be able to sit with people, hear their stories, not find that need to fix. I mean, I was projecting a lot earlier because I was trying to fix others, of course, and this is a lot of your listeners will relate to this. It's like that's why we go into these fields. I haven't fixed myself, so if I can fix you, it seems like it's part of the process. Where now it just feels more of sitting with people and helping them just to maybe have a greater understanding. Some of what was done to me, now I feel like I get to do to others.
So leave us with one last piece of hope, a principle or something you want to leave with our audience as they're facing some of these same things, whether it's mental illness, a heavy weight of leadership, their spouse or their kid is going through something super difficult. Leave us with a word of hope.
Well, I think the biggest thing to me is just remembering that God longs to do that deep work in our heart, and that He is sometimes just waiting to be asked. He doesn't force Himself on us, but sometimes that's where He really wants to do His greatest work. And remembering that it's the heart work and how our hearts are healed, and then how we can have that flow into others, the people that we live with, and our family, our children, our spouses, and then from there. And I just think God is just waiting sometimes to be asked to help along that journey.
I love that. Such a powerful way to end is He's waiting for permission.
Yes, He
and
is.
I think you said it earlier, Monty, you gave your permission to yourself to receive, and then giving God and others permission to come in. So good. Well, thank you for being so vulnerable and real. And honestly, this is why we do the Living Wholehearted podcast, why we are living wholehearted, and why we have amazing people like Monty on our staff who are coming alongside leaders like you. If you are needing a resource, a counselor, an executive coach, somebody that understands trauma and the neurobiology, as well as what God is calling of us to do the heart work so we could be wholehearted leaders, you can go to our website at livingwholehearted.com and explore options there. Or we often will resource people with someone in your community if we can't help you wherever you're at. And make sure you tell someone else about this podcast. This is a really important episode. We think all our episodes are important, but I think for such a time as this particular story is probably a lot of our stories right now. So would you share this with someone else and let someone else know about this podcast?
Yeah, and we are also, Tara and I are excited to be launching our Wholehearted Leadership Cohorts for 2021. This is going to be a special experience for cohort members to go and travel and journey with us on this mission to shrink our integrity gaps, both from a character and competency standpoint, a 2-year journey. Applications are being available here this month, and we hope that you'll give it consideration. Again, visit livingwholehearted.com for more information. And until next time, Monty and Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Love you both.
Yeah.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.